Shh, I'm on live now, baby. Oh. Welcome back to We Belong Here, our series at Advanced Native Political Leadership, where we talk with leaders throughout Indian country on the topics and work building political power. That includes educating our public on positions that impact our lives. My name is Prairie Seminole. I'm the citizen of the 3 affiliated tribes and staff here at Advanced Native Political Leadership. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge the events this week calling us to act for our missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and peoples. President Biden has made remarks proclaiming May 5th as a day of recognition, acknowledgement, and action. So we just want to take a moment of silence to honor those lives that we are mourning and those families who are dealing with loss of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples across the nation and across the globe. Thank you for that. This week, we are talking about the census. The census numbers preliminary data has dropped, and that data has a lot to do in our communities. We are surrounded by decisions that are made from the census data, from our infrastructure, our roads, our economic development, whether or not our communities are economic corridors for businesses to plant and establish there, and other services. We are joined this week to have a conversation by Jaynie Parrish, who is a citizen of the Navajo Nation. Jaynie is currently the executive director of the Navajo County Democrats. She previously served as a social media manager at Emily's List and was responsible for the social media messaging to elect pro-choice Democratic women to public office. She taught American Indian Studies and Women Gender Studies at the University of North Dakota. She's worked with intertribal sports, the National Indian Gaming Association, Rock the Vote, and Arizona State University Office of the President. She was professional staff for the Denise Juneau for Congress and Hillary Clinton campaigns, and then started her own digital practice, Parrish Digital, where she specializes in expanding social and digital networks for tribes and organizations. Jaynie also is an alum of Arizona State University and the Harvard Kennedy School. Welcome, Jaynie. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Sure. Hi, Prairie Rose. Great to be here. Yate, Jaynie Parrish and the Bethlehem Nishle, Ashim Bushishin, Nakaid Nishe, Dorotoj Ini Additional. And those are my clans for my Navajo relatives. And I'm originally from Window Rock and Kayenta. My mother's side is Lupton, Window Rock area. My dad's from Kayenta. That's where I grew up. However, I got to do some transitioning and became an urban Indian for high school and then ASU for college. So that's my growing up places, but we'll cut it short. But really, it took me a while, but to kind of be in the political spaces, but I became an organizer officially, I guess you would say, with that title in 2012. After on the Obama campaign with Rock the Vote, and haven't really left the sphere since then. And I've been registering voters and trying to get good policies and good leaders to represent us. So that's a little bit about the work that I've been doing. But my family is all in Arizona, and we all got vaccinated and had a great mini reunion. So I hope there's more to come. So.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm actually recently fresh off the vaccination train myself. My partner just got his second dose yesterday morning. So he's feeling it a little bit this weekend, but in a couple of weeks, we hope to be visiting family too. How long have you been in Arizona?
Well, I actually moved back about a year ago now. So I was working with Emily's List for about a year. And I was living in DC, and before that, I was living in North Dakota, and that's where I met you and Twyla and Bruce and Courtney and all the wonderful family we have now in North Dakota. We miss you all, but that's where we met all of you when I was working there at the University of North Dakota, and before that, Alaska and California. So we're in a lot of places, but I left Arizona probably around 2010 to go out in the world and work and live in different places. But and came back to Arizona on and off to visit and stay for long periods. But really, I came back to really be back in community again last year. And so, and I love sharing the story because it was my calling home. I was out in the world doing wonderful things, and leaders from my tribe, but also from the state, knew that I was wanting to do more. And they said, you know, this is what we're doing here in the state of Arizona. We need your help. Come home. And I couldn't say no. I was like literally crying on the phone after I got off that call because it was, you know, people I respected. And when you get that call, you're just like, I gotta go. So I came back home, and it was at the start of the pandemic. And I was like, this is what I can do, is get out the vote. I don't know how, but we're going to do it. And we've had a great team in Northeast Arizona. And we work predominantly in Navajo, Hopi, and White Mountain and San Carlos tribes. And our team has just rocked it and have some incredible numbers to share. But we won Arizona with that group and a bunch of other folks pitching in from partisan and nonpartisan groups, and just really leveraging the tribal vote here in Arizona.
Yeah, Arizona is such a unique state, especially when we talk about nation to nation relationships being established, and the jurisdictional issues being, I believe, 20 different tribal nations across the state. You know, the census numbers are affect that data, especially when it comes to infrastructure. If a tribe wants to build a road, there's multiple jurisdictions and conversations that have to be had when it comes to building a road and providing different services. For folks who we may not realize that we are touched by the census number decisions every day, but they are a reality. I think there was a huge push in 2020 for all of us to do the census either online or at various locations. But tribes, I think, really did a good job to not be undercounted. With historical previous census data shows that we were significantly undercounted, and there's a lot that contributes to that undercounting. You know, one being the mistrust of the U.S. government and non-Native people coming and knocking on our doors, asking who lives here, how many of there are of us. And unfortunately, youth are one of the largest undercounted populations across Indian country. And then coming into urban areas, again, similar situations where we have intergenerational families living within one household. And then our communities that are unhoused not being counted. And I think the pandemic really led to potentially significant undercounts across the country, just in that respect, where our urban folks and our rural folks were potentially undercounted. But I feel like our tribes having complete count committees across the country being established did as much as they could to get our people counted, incentivizing counts, being a part of, I teased our friends up in Alaska saying, can I be counted in Alaska? Because they were having drawings for, if you do your survey, you could get like a new snowmobile or some salmon or like a moose cut. And I'm like, can I go to Alaska and be counted?
They got me at those fish bellies, man. That's what I like.
Right? I mean, just the way that the tribes were so innovative in getting our people counted. My partner and I were at our country house when the census workers came up, all masked up, wearing gloves, you know, had their little stylus to point on the iPad and get us counted within the household, right? And I mean, it was cool to get into a door prize drawing for a $25 gift certificate, but it was also even cooler just to know that our tribes, our workers, our community members were the ones going door to door. So it was somebody we knew, it was somebody we hopefully trusted, and got our numbers up. And
many of the organizers did double duty with that, where census was there, but also registering. And so it was a lot of lift for people because of the pandemic. And I think just because the way the environment was set up politically and elsewhere, it really motivated people. And it was a good campaign that was, I think, really good lessons in local organizing for some communities to like you said, that everybody knows their community differently, and how is it you're gonna get people to move? And so it's not just so transactional relationship, but a real, like, we're doing this for our community and taking it to heart.
Yeah, and for our community, I mean, we have a tribal college that's established, and we really depend on census numbers, not only for funding coming into our tribal college and our local economy, but for other educational needs. Head Start, Pell Grants, they're all funded by the census data. So we want to ensure that people were accurately counted, and we know that the ethnic data coming out from the 2020 census won't be released just yet, so we can't confirm whether or not our tribal communities grew when headlines already say that this was one of the lowest population increases across the country. But I think there were many factors that contributed to, potential undercounts across the country, even though we know some areas were counted very thoroughly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a big challenge, as we all know, we're for example, in Navajo and Hopi, there were lockdowns. You couldn't get in and out in a lot of the places unless you had people in those communities already helping out. And I know when I was in Kianta, there were people though that would leave things at the door, which is great. So that's how we got to help my dad fill out his, because they left it at the fence. And we were able to fill it out that way. So there was, for those that did it, and I think that there was a lot of those. I mean, in addition to all the other barriers that they usually say about census, education levels and socioeconomic levels and things like that. But I mean, there is something to say that across the board, I'm curious to see as to what the undercount is, because historically we've always been undercounted. And so we're just, I guess, having to wait and see like what the gap would be from this last 10 years to now.
Yeah, and I want to think that, our Indigenous Black and Brown communities have been still having babies, right? Like we're still building community in all the ways possible. And census numbers really contribute to our economic growth, not just population growth, but the economic growth that we have. I think about those 20 tribal nations across Arizona working across multiple jurisdictions, and the funding received. Tribal governments are huge contributors to the not just local economies, but the state economy. That those numbers may not be potentially calculated, but we know that they're enormous.
Right.
So.
It's like $1 billion from one of the last stats I heard or read somewhere was that, and I wrote it down, the federal government directs nearly $1 billion in resources for schools, housing per year to Indian country using the census data.
Well, one person potentially, and I think this was true in Arizona, that one person not counted is, $3,600 or $3,700 not going into that community. I mean, 10 people, that's $37,000 not going into a particular community. So if you're undercounted by 5%, 6%, 9%, that can really add up to significant barriers for access to, the development and capacity of smaller communities. Plus the factor that, businesses want to come into a community that has the numbers that they can be served and flourish and thrive as on this capitalistic system when we come into these corridors.
Well, absolutely. And the way that we're also, when we're on the ground, and our team's on the ground trying to register voters and engage on that policy front, we have to use data census to kind of help illustrate the numbers, not so much where it's like too wonky, but to give a clear picture. So for example, recently there's been an announcement of $4 billion for COVID relief for Indian country. And that's a big number that a lot of our folks need to know. But then again, when it gets a little bit smaller, how is it impacting their community? How do they know it's going to be this much? And how are they going to divvy up? And that's where that data will come in and be really helpful for all of those things, like with COVID relief, or especially in the Indian healthcare system and stuff. So I like to, it's still a challenge when you're trying to educate people on the connection, but once those stories come in, the personal stories, and then you're like, oh, that's why. And so I think the more that we're able to do that with census data, the better we'll be for the next time around again, because people are going to see the shortcuts, or they're going to see where it did help. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting to the question too, like how does this affect and inform our work within the political landscape across Indian country? You know, Indian Country Today has a great article on the winners and losers of the census right now, just with the preliminary data, and how elected seats are being added in both the legislatures and in the congressional seats. And Arizona, for the first time in 70 years, did not gain a seat, and I think it was a small number too that was needed to have like one more seat and get one more district recognized.
I want to say that was probably New York, but you're right. I mean, I'll put the link in the chat, and I can share the document that I have of notes.
It
But
was New York and Arizona. New York and
yeah,
Arizona. Yeah, New York, I think it was like 98 people. They needed like 98 people, and Arizona needed like a small amount of number two. And Navajo County is probably saying, we had it. We had those people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things, there's another op-ed article that a couple people are writing about, like, what happened? Why didn't we get the 10 seats we wanted? We have 9 now. And, there's a all bunch of theories besides, I mean, reasons besides the pandemic, but one of them was resources, which a lot of people talk about, is how come we could have done more to try to reach more people, but for certain levels and leadership positions that this wasn't the case. And I think I saw a discrepancy at one point, like 1.9 million was spent in Arizona and something like 40 million in New York. So I mean, there are big differences, of course, of cities, but still that kind of shows some big gaps in certain states about what they, so that was one. But I think right now for us also how it's impacting us is Arizona was part of a lawsuit many years ago trying to make sure we didn't have too many gerrymandered districts in our area. And so we have what we call the Independent Redistricting Commission now, the IRC, which is now in place. And the census determines those congressional seats. So the IRC committee is picked, and they will now deliberate over a certain amount of time to start mapping out those districts with the census data. So they're still starting up right now. They're having meetings. I think I wasn't part of the last step of 10 years ago, but there's some people around, obviously, that are very knowledgeable about this IRC process. And so there was something like 200 plus meetings that the IRC had the last round. So now they're going to have these meetings, and it's open to the public. It's supposed to be for transparency, which is good. So then we won't have those oddly shaped districts like some other places, but you still have to, like the public, the voting folks still have to pay attention, because you don't want certain things to happen when you're not watching. And so now with the IRC and the census, they're waiting for that to come through. And like you said, it'll be released like in the fall. But I think what's important for the IRC, what they want is for people to participate and learn. Like I'm learning right now along with the rest of my team, because I wasn't part of the process, and I'm trying to figure out, what do we need to comment on? What do we need to say? But it's this, and then we have to translate this to our voters who are not in the political circles on the day-to-day. They're going to have no idea. So we have to then translate, why is this important? Similar to census, why is this important for us to pay attention to? And so it's connecting all the dots, I guess, in a very simple way that we can. But that's how I know Census is going to be working with us going forward with the IRC in Arizona. And in addition to all the funding, that's going to be broken up into the 21 tribes. So we have 22, but Zuni, they just have land in Arizona, but they don't have a community. So it's like the 21. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
You bring up a really great piece on the redistricting and the gerrymandering issue, because we know potentially there's going to be new districts cut. There has to be some, especially in the states that gained a seat, right? Mm-hmm. How the states that gained a seat, I believe, are Colorado, Montana, Oregon, Florida, and North Carolina, battleground states that increased in population enough to include a new congressional district and potentially new legislative seats in their assembly. So we're looking at the expansion of our electorate with the Native votes within those areas, especially when we know that the Native vote contributed to participation in the 2020 elections and probably previous elections. But the reality is, like, we don't know yet. And one of the later conversations on We Belong Here is going to be dedicated to what redistricting looks like. I've got some familiarity with how North Dakota and Minnesota operate, and I know in the past every redistricting in Minnesota has always gone to the Supreme Court. So our judiciary seats also play an incredibly important role in the accountability and the preservation of our democracy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really great to see, again, referring back to that article. And I'm glad, I mean, I'm no census expert by no means, I know but we'll have those folks that can break down the numbers a little bit more and show that. And that's what we're going to need in the future when they're available. But it's good to still see the headlines. For example, I saw a tweet from the Native Governance Center, and they had written, Native nations played a huge role in helping Minnesota keep the 8th congressional seat. Shout out to the Minnesota Tribal Coalition for Civic Engagement for all the work on tribal census mobilization. So for the folks that are paying attention to their impact locally, I thought that was one really great example. And we have those stories, it's just not shared necessarily like that on the national platform, because I was going to tell you this one story before I forget. There's a women group, a women organizing group in White Mountain Apache. They're called Wood, and they're an incredible group of women that just, they couldn't wait. They weren't going to wait on the state or county or people to come in and do things. They're just like, we got to do this. So they started organizing amongst themselves the drive-throughs for voter registration in addition to census. And they went all out with census. It was great to see those photos. But that's, like you said, when it comes to mobilizing and making a difference in the importance, that was one group that I love to always see, because they captured it on video and film too. So that's a bonus. But that was a really great way to see the mobilizing effort in addition to Minnesota. So. Let's see.
Oh, I thought you froze for a second. So I was like,
oh, sorry.
It's okay. Now the redistricting process, we'll have a really important conversation about that later on, but the impact of the census on our 2022 campaign season and our electorate, I think really will inform some policy, especially when it comes to informing how we've established these care packages and community models of care within our local districts and cities and states, even where the funding coming in from those major relief packages and potentially later on how those numbers are going to be affecting our local communities and our tribal communities as well. I mean, the reality that the first mechanism in place for tribes wasn't established for that COVID relief package initially showed that we were not a priority. And I think enough movement has been created for us to say we are a priority, and there's, we have a unique political class as Indigenous people across this country. How are we being taken care of as well? And just holding them accountable.
I agree. I mean, that's all well and good to see. I mean, that's why I'm here too, and really keen on the IRC and how things are going to be divvied up. Because again, I haven't paid attention to the process before, but I'm really interested to see how they're taking the numbers and translating it into policy or cutting up, because that's going to be really the tell, I think, for tribal governments to make their plans and state governments for the next 10 years or whatever, and researching, because researchers always go back to that. And I always think of, Abigail Echohawk, right? Of course, her wonderful work with the Seattle Urban Indian Council. But I mean, even just that, of collecting data on that front and how she explains it so well, and that the invisibility of Native people through that process, how it then translates into the census processes as well in the research. All of that is connected. And so when we talked earlier about who do we go to for census kind of breakdown in Indian country from our own folks, you have mentioned Jackie De Leon from NARF, and I know Jessica Imitachi, who works for Census, and then a few other folks that have the knowledge. And so I'm really excited to see some of those folks when the numbers come out to be able to break it down, because I don't know how that looks, and I would love to see the numbers, because all I know is like you can see stuff right now, like the population difference on the census data they released on April 1st. And the difference from 10 years ago to now, you can see the account historical data mapping on there. And then you can also see things like the resident, not the resident population, but the one graphic that I really was interested in was the self-response rate too. So there's some nice hidden tools in the current census page that you can go in by your state. And even though it hasn't broken it down by race or anything yet, or specific demographics, that's coming, but you get to see the overall picture of your state anyway.
Yeah, we really paid attention to that when the tribes were taking the census here in North Dakota. When we were incentivizing it, we could see like, okay, only 30% of our tribe has self-declared or self-counted. Where are the rest of you at? And so, and it helped drive the, sorry, we got kids here. It helped drive the ground strategy as well. I think early on, the census was so hopeful that they were, we're going to hire 1 million people across the country. We're going to make sure that everybody had a representative in the count. And then all of a sudden this pandemic hit, and an incredible year, right? The most important survey of the year that needed to be taken, and one of the most important elections of our lifetime up to date, right? Where it affected our ground plan for not just census and getting numbers, but all of these campaigns. So the pandemic gave us this insight into using new technology and informing our campaigns on what technology is working and what isn't. But going into 2022, we're going to be using some of that same technology to reach and engage voters, to reach and engage new voters that may not have cared about some of these issues, but now they know, right? There's so much of education being done around how the census touches our lives. And for students, that was very eye-opening to know that it wasn't just the tribal colleges or local colleges, land grant colleges, it was all colleges being funded through census numbers. They get a percentage, right? And then the Pell Grants going into a certain area. A significant amount of other financial aid being offered and opened up. It affects young people.
Every aspect of our lives.
Every aspect of our life, even when it comes to housing, right? Our housing, our development of other services, SNAP benefits, all very much dependent on census numbers. And so what are policymakers looking at as they go into 2022 and discussing how these numbers are going to inform certain decisions and meaningful policy? Significantly the redistricting pieces, but the other areas of looking at why were we undercounted, right? And if we look at the historical pieces about why Indigenous people were undercounted, you have them listed here as well.
Yeah, one of the ones I kept saying, and it was interesting for me because it was just labeled over and over again. I didn't look at all of the 12, but I just had put a couple in the document, maybe the top 5 or 6, but they definitely list like low income as one of them, linguistic isolation. So some of the languages, obviously with 575 or plus tribes, and then all the different languages, low socioeconomic status, educational attainment, lacking phones, lacking internet, unemployment, are just a few. I'm not sure if you know any others, but those are like key ones. And you saw it. I mean, for any campaign, I think when you, as you know, you're an amazing organizer yourself. When you're in the field, you have to have an online game, but also a very much offline game, because not everybody's going to have access to what we're on right now. So, I think that's for anything with whatever campaign you're running, is how am I getting to the people one-on-one, distance, safely, radio, how am I utilizing all these other communication pieces that is not heavily reliant on Zoom or social media.
Right, and we leaned very heavily on social media and technology for the census and for campaigns in 2020, realizing that our rural populations, the broadband reach across this country, we've got some significant issues, but the unhoused and the unemployed numbers, I think, significantly contributed to undercounting, potential undercounting, excuse me, but also the reality of the stay-at-home orders. So many of our states had stay-at-home orders during the peak of the census intake. And I mean, on one hand, we saw a lot of people self declaring and using their 10 minutes of their time to answer 10 questions about their household. But then those who do not have technology, policymakers are looking at in expansion of broadband. They're looking also at the expansion of Medicaid and Medicare, where in states and rural areas that saw a tragic number of COVID-19 cases during the pandemic, saying, what do we need to do better? How can we do this better? And so I'm looking at seeing some policy around those care pieces. And
well, I'm really excited about the broadband, because that's part of the thing that's coming out of the census, or from years before, but even now, is here in Arizona, it should be everywhere now though, but forms where our communities can fill out to get internet. Now, I don't know the quality of it, but also even that would be a barrier, because then we're like, well, how do we get people who want it to fill out the form? And and how is that form readily available? Just like voting or census, do they have to mail it in, or is it purely online, or like what are all the mechanisms to get that stuff going? But I'm hoping that at least that something like that will make a dent in our communities for broadband access to do all these other things, because it's so needed. It's great.
It is very much so. Even here in North Dakota, when I moved to this place, I had to wait just over 2 weeks to have internet provided for my household, and that was because there was no hardwire, and so they had to lay the hardwire, and 2 months later they finally buried that line, right? Like,
wow, I'm glad you got internet. When I was in Canton trying to get internet, no, because everyone, anybody who call these days, what's your physical address? And everything is run off of that. I'm like, no, you guys are here. It's Frontier. You guys are here. I know you're here. And if they have someone else in another part of the country answering the phones, and we can't find that. And I'm like, I know you guys are here. We don't go by physical ad. And it's so frustrating. And that was just me for like an hour on the phone, then calling different numbers. And I was like, I'm giving up right now, trying to get internet here. It was difficult. But I mean, you can imagine just the possibility of even trying to get a physical location for someone to come out. And it's challenging. But we're going to get this done. I think it's just getting the right mechanisms in place.
Yeah, we're there. I mean, this was a struggle during the 2010 census, and movement was made by the 2020 census, and the 2020 census really, I think, is setting a priority to get some of these initiatives done. So,
did you get to work on anything with the 2010 census?
I helped get out the count. The out here in North Dakota, I didn't work for the census, but I was involved actually helping to count the unhoused population, and so we would do place and time counts for the unhoused. I was working with an organization that worked with a lot of our unhoused community here in the region, and we had a coalition, and we did 3 points and count, and then tried to get people an address. And so we identified different shelters that would allow for, multiple people to be counted there. And so that was a big piece in 2010, getting us services there. But there was a lot of barriers in place too, because again, the distrust, like, I don't want to be counted. Now the government's going to track me. And we're like, no, not
Yeah,
necessarily.
that's still it's very real. I mean, it's not really, there's legitimate reasons, and I can see that.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, and in 2020, I was a part of one of the national faith coalitions leading our faith communities to be counted, and got to help with some promotional materials, and got some education at the national level. And it was kind of cool to be mailed like these giant boxes of swag, census swag. And then the pandemic hits, and we're like, I've got 400 water bottles in my garage, and I don't know what to do with these. So luckily, I was able to get them dispersed.
That's good. You bring up a great point that I don't always pay attention to. It's there on the radar, but since you were in it on the day-to-day, the unhoused, and just how mobile our folks still are today, from whether they're in the urban area or the county or back home in their tribal community area. And that's one of the biggest things. And in Phoenix, there's a very still big, large population of homeless Native folks, but there's some programs to help, but it's not enough. And it's like, where are they being falling through the cracks, and how are they being counted, with whether it was census or voting? And so you're trying to make sure you're not missing too many people, but that's a real deal. And
it is
looking at the organizations that are really trying to help.
Well, and I can imagine too, in Phoenix, one of the organizations I used to work with in downtown Phoenix, used to also do, I think I said date and time, I misspoke earlier, point in time counts for our unhoused population. And during the pandemic, a lot of those organizations had to shut down those programs, especially, the ones that provided heat respite for the unhoused population. Sandwiches and water, right? Like, just kind of essentials during the pandemic. They had to shut down those programs. And so I know it led to some undercounting for sure in that particular demographic. And but it also created this unique opportunity for funding unique projects to get respite to individuals, and have distancing established within buildings that could accommodate our unhoused populations. And it's all these challenges, and then how the communities show up around it, right? And we've got some incredible leaders who are working from their heart, wanting to make a difference, and some who are also saying it's not my problem, but I think we should elect those people out.
Well, one of the questions that I would like to have for one of the experts that comes through too is, there's a term that I was looking at called the hard to count tracks. And so I'm wondering, in these formulas that they start making, if they account for that, because I'm seeing in the information, for example, in Arizona, the hard to count HTCs are 65.6%, and in Alaska's, I'm sorry, that was Alaska, 65.6, and Arizona 68, and South Dakota about 52. And so this is all under those 12 characteristics we mentioned earlier. So I'm hoping that there's some compensation that they do with this, so that when they account for the future formulas and distribution of funds and what have you, that this is accounted for, because that's a lot of people, and that's a lot of groups.
For South Dakota, for it to be 52%, and 68% in Alaska, that's pretty incredible. I wouldn't know the answers to that, so I'll have to call the census director tomorrow. Just kidding. That's really interesting, especially with IRCs and within our states, and how policymakers are going to show up in those areas. We, being more engaged demographic as the Native voters across the country, we have to be informed on how these the process plays out. I mean, who benefits from the process, who doesn't, right? Who makes the decisions? How can we inform and affect those decisions? And how do we show up, right? Like those are all pieces when we want to engage and change and transition. But the reality is that some of us have been left out of the process for so long, we just don't know where to engage and how to connect. And so organizers like yourself and the many others across this country are having to be aware of, this might be an area we have to dive into and figure out how do we connect to it.
I was always hoping there was something in the laws that would be like, hey, let's redo this. Or let's have a continuation of this after we get into the new year, but it wasn't the case. I guess you just can't really hold on to any of that. If you don't mind, or I'm not sure when we're going to be calling this into the end, we're already at the 42 hour. I was just going to show some links if people wanted to go for themselves to see like self-response rates or anything like that.
I don't know how we can do that.
Oh, okay.
I can't invite you to share your screen. We can put them into the link on the Facebook Live itself if you want to post underneath that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
That will work for me.
That's the way I can think of sharing those.
Well, and I was just thinking of visually, it might be a lot easier for folks to see themselves in the mapping and the number breakdowns if they want to go around and play on the census website. But I found that really interesting earlier today when I was on the site. And it's funny. I don't know if you remember the big maps that they were handing out, the tribal nations maps that were huge, like wall sized. And I was so proud of that one I got from 2010. And I'm like, all right, I'm waiting for the new one. So I was like, I mean, they're really helpful. And a lot of people like to see that. But on this mapping, you kind of see some of the similar information, but it's not broken down obviously yet, but you can see it by state and nationwide.
Not yet. Yeah, the census process was very much rushed, and having a July deadline for self counting and then a September deadline for the workers, and then to turn around with the data really quickly. I mean, there's just room for when you speed something up, there's always room for error, I think. But I know they did the best they could with what they had. They really tried. The census staff were incredible to work with on a national level, and
what can you do in the middle of a pandemic?
Right? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, we can wrap it up too. Thank you for your time, Jaynie. This has been an informative conversation. Feel free to put the links that you've mentioned on our Facebook Live in the below comment section. I think we can try to pin that. We'll try to. Folks can check it out.
No problem. I'll just put it under the video. That makes sense. So there's a lot of links people can check out on them for themselves.
Yeah. And we'll look at how redistricting, what's going to be coming up with that in later conversations. You are doing incredible work in Arizona. I know you all have raised a lot of money. You're already putting feet on the ground pretty soon for the 2022 election cycle, and getting out the Native vote. I mean, more than that, you're educating voters and getting them involved. So thank you for all the work that you're doing in, building Native political power.
Thank you. We have an incredible team. I mean, like your area, our tribes went across the way they drew the maps. Our counties are in multiple places, so we have to try to cover as much ground as we can. But and I think it speaks to not only, like, how do I say this? Year-round investment, really. Yeah, you know how important that is. It's not just coming in 2 months or 6 months before an election, but like really being there and establishing real relationships and trust. And so that's what we're trying to do. And this year we're, since it's not necessarily getting people out on a specific election day, it's having these conversations about census and really having the real topical kind of things. What do you care about? How is this helping with healthcare? And so that they see the connections from their vote, and so that they do more than just cast their ballot, I guess you could say, because it's great that you show up to cast your ballot, but we want you to remain engaged. And so I think that's our message, is how do we do that? What do you mean by being engaged? Well, let's talk about voter registration, or let's talk about there's a whole list of things that we give them, but to really be a part of this and develop the leadership that your group is really good at. And so it's kind of like all these baby steps wrapped in together.
Absolutely. Yeah, we depend on that relational organizing to really allow leaders to step into their power and hopefully get into a position where they feel that they can make a difference in those structures around us that are making decisions about us. So I want them to not only just step into that leadership role, but to run for office and be the fulfillment of our ancestors' dreams to make justice happen within the government structures around us. Well, we'll wrap this up, Jaynie. Any closing remarks that you have for us?
Not much, except if you're not already involved, please do get involved. Maybe learn about IRC in your state, or maybe that's about the voting process in your state, or anything. I mean, just find community, and you always got something to offer. And I think people, they may not always know that, but that everyone's needed at some form to pitch in. So
absolutely. It's a perfect way to close. Thank you, Jaynie. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll catch you next time on We Belong Here.
thank you.